We ready here? All right, I think we're back, and I see Patrick Frank has joined us at the desk. Mr. Frank, welcome. You're on.
For the general obligation bond program, the bond, that's the capital budget bill. On page 1, you can see that the budget for the debt service is increasing about 4% from 2024 to 2025. That's consistent with recent increases and is what we expected. I'm going to move on to page 3 now, and that just gives a list of the different kinds of geo debt that the state can issue. Then on page 4 is exhibit number 1. What this shows is how the debt is broken down by principal, interest, and there is a small sinking fund payment that the state makes also. As in most years, the principal is over 2/3 of the debt service cost. And the reason for that is the state has very short amortization of its debt. It's limited to 15 years by the Constitution. The average debt service is 10 years. And so we pay down our debt more quickly. If we went to a 30-year amortization, just as an example, these numbers would be about 50-50 between principal and interest. Page 5, exhibit number 2 shows the debt service cost in fiscal 2025. This is just to make sure the number's right. And this shows you the different kinds of debt service that we have. I think what's interesting about this is 96% of 2025's debt service has already been issued. So even if we cancel the capital program, not that anybody would suggest that, we'd only save about 4% of the cost. So it's a lot of it's already been issued. On page 6 is exhibit number 3. This is kind of a reconciliation of the annuity bond fund. The annuity bond fund is the fund that pays most of the debt service cost. It is funded by the state property tax. In 2024, if you look at the line there, you see that it starts with the balance of about $70 million in 2024. There are some capital authorizations, $425 million in general funds also available, and it ends with a $42 million fund balance. When DLS looked at these numbers, I noticed that there was a discrepancy, and it looks like there's about a little bit over $20 million that is dedicated to the capital authorizations that is not available. So there's basically about a $20 million shortfall in this account in 2024. Because of the large fund balance at the beginning of the year, this is not a problem. However, when you go on to 2025, you see that the fund balance is about $21 million below what's necessary to make all of these payments. So then that would mean that all of the commitments are not funded right in this budget at that time. What DLS is recommending is that there be a $22 million supplemental budget appropriation for this. Now, I've talked to the State Treasurer's Office and the Department of Budget Management. We all agree on the numbers. We all agree that there are multiple approaches and solutions to this problem. In our case, we had to have this analysis posted last Sunday. So our hand was forced pretty early in this, and our standard recommendation was just if something's short, with this case, especially with the debt service account, we're recommending the $22 million. This how this gets resolved will be worked out through the rest of the session or the next month, I would think. Now on page 7, I'm going to move on to the state property tax revenues. And really the question here is how good do we feel? How stable is this revenue source for us? I'll start with page 7, exhibit number 4. This shows the median home prices and also the inventory. The data here is from the Maryland Association of Realtors. The red line is the median sale price. And the dotted blue line is inventory. One thing I do is I've been doing this for a few years, and I've noticed that there sometimes are revisions to these numbers. Almost always there are some revisions. Now on the median sale price, these revisions are very modest, of maybe $1,000 off $250,000. So it's a very, if anything, is a very small revision. On the other hand, the inventory can be revised quite a bit. And I suspect that line that dipped in 2023 that we see there is probably going to be revised upward. So there won't be such a stark dip there. So I guess what I'm saying is these, you should have some confidence in these numbers and that in 2025, we should have reasonably get the revenues that we're expecting. Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to point out as well is if you look at the red line, look about 2007, 2008, that's where home prices peaked during the housing bubble of the last decade. Now I'm going to go to page 8 and exhibit number 5. Here, the red line in this one is what the state property tax earns for every penny of property tax, what it earns. And the dotted blue line is the homestead tax credit. What the homestead tax credit is state property tax are limited to a 10% increase per year. If your assessment increases beyond 10%, instead of making you pay that additional amount, you get a homestead tax credit. And as you can see, what happened in 2008 and 2009 with the housing bubble, there were very large homestead tax credits given. So that was part of the reason, and that's one of the reasons why if you look at here at 2011 is when revenues peak, which is 3 to 4 years after the home values peak. And so part of what happened here is people were given their credits. And in other words, the state purposely keeps the state property tax low and people have time then to adjust even if their home values are adjusting quickly. A second factor in all of this is there's a 3-year assessment cycle. So if homes increase, only about a third of the homes will have been assessed. And so that's also slows. And so what's happening here with this is when home prices appreciate, there's kind of a lag between state collections. And this was especially pronounced in the housing bubble. And that's why 2008 was home price peak, and a few years later is when the price per penny peaked. And once again, this is a positive thing in the sense that it gives us more confidence that we will over the next few years, we're probably going to collect the revenues that we are forecasting. And last exhibit on state property taxes on page 9 is exhibit number 6. And this shows the difference between what the receipts are in the state property tax and what the GO bond debt service costs are. The state purposely wants to keep the state property taxes low. There's a lot of support for that. And so the conscious policy is to have these general fund appropriations to make up the difference between these two bars on this exhibit. That was the I guess the first half of the analysis is the what's happening with the revenues of state property tax. And I'm going to turn to the debt service to talk about what's happening with that debt service. I'll go to page 11, exhibit number 7. This shows interest rates since January of 1962. I'm using the 10-year US Treasury note. The reason I'm using this is, as I said earlier, 10 years is the average maturity of Maryland bonds. So this matches closely. Also, this is the longest series I could find and that goes back the furthest. And so that's a reason it's chosen. As you can see, the blue line is what the daily rates are for each business day that bonds are sold on markets. And what's interesting about this to me is that rates have been extremely low in the last since about 2008. About 70% of the values for this. Okay, the red line there, what that is that was the rate of this rate on January 22nd, 2024. That's the day I had to close out this analysis and finish writing it and send it on. And on that day, if you look at it, if you go over this 24-year or 62-year period, what you see is 70% of the time the interest rates was higher than it was on that day in January. And of those that are lower, almost all of them are since 2008. So we are coming out of a period of very low interest rates. And so part, I guess the perspective is if in 2008, I would tell you what the interest rate is, you'd have said, oh, that's a good rate. That's lower than we've been expecting. And now, but times have changed and the perceptions have changed. On page 12 is exhibit number 8. And what this shows, this is kind of the same thing, except it's over a shorter period of time. And what I'm concerned about here is the red line there is that's the interest rates we assume in our forecast. So if interest rates come in below that, then the debt service costs are going to come in at or below what we're forecasting now. If rates rise above it, then then we would have to revise our forecast, especially in the out years, and add to the general funds that we would need to pay. And as you can see, I start with the 3 bond sales ago. That was the last of the very low bond sales that we had over this recent period before there was an increase in the interest rates. It was about 1.42% was the average, the true interest cost of the rates, which is the average interest rate paid on that. 2.9% is what we're paid in the last 2. As you can see, the indices that I use, the 10-year Treasury note, and also I use a 20 bond index. That's of state and local debt that is used. And so just to kind of see, the markets tend to move together, but they don't move exactly together. And so we are still below that 5%, and we're even below the 4% line now. So it seems reasonable to expect that the next bond sale will come in under the interest rates that we are projecting. Page 13 is an observation about the new capital program. One of the features of the program is it's moving a lot of the PAYGO that's paid for with the general funds into the GEO bond program. Not all of those will qualify for the lowest GEO debt that we have, which is the tax exempt debt. And so what I did is I took a look, went back and saw how much more it costs to issue the taxable debt. There was a sale in 2019 for $14.9 million. It was $1.1 million in additional debt service costs. So there definitely is a cost in the out years associated with it, with moving this to taxable debt. I do want to observe that the Treasurer's Office, their policy is to have this debt be as short term as it can be, and that makes it less expensive. Then, if you're going to issue taxable debt, you might as well do it smart and make the maturity shorter, and that is what the Treasurer's Office does. The next group of exhibits is going to be about the capital program. As you all know, it is larger this year than it was before. So there's 2 questions to that. Is it affordable based on the criteria that we use? And the second is, what are the out year costs associated with that? And so to answer the affordability question, Exhibit 10 on page 15 takes a look at debt service as a percentage of state revenues. That's one of our criteria. As you can see here, the limit is 8%. If we're below 8%, we consider it affordable. We're actually below 7%, so we're definitely affordable. The blue there is the GEO bonds, the red is transportation bonds, and there are a couple of other debt issuances like the Stadium Authority, the Bay Restoration bonds, and capital leases, and that's these smaller yellow parts. Same question with the debt outstanding to personal income, which is on page 16. That's exhibit number 11. Once again, here 4% is the limit. We are below 3%, so we're affordable. 2 things I would say to this, that what could move the needle on these things? Two things come to mind that could move the needle. One is additional transportation revenues. If there are additional transportation revenues provided, that helps on the revenue side of this equation by giving extra revenues. But transportation policy has been to leverage revenues. So the amount of debt that is sold usually is more than the revenues that come in, and so that has a tendency to push up the debt service to revenues ratio. The second would be if there were a recession. Now, recessions usually result in, even if it's slower growth, because we are assuming growth in the out years with the revenues. We're using the same revenues as BRE puts together, and so that would, even slower growth would reduce the ratio, the debt service to revenues ratio. But as I said, we are well below that. Another factor in this is that everything seems to lag in this analysis. That's the case too with authorizations and issuance and debt service. When you authorize new bonds, the state Treasurer is not going to issue those bonds until the projects are ready to spend the money. So if there's a new project that takes a few years to plan before you're ready to spend that money, then the Treasurer delays issuing bonds. And actually, the assumption is it takes about 5 years to issue all the bonds that are authorized. And usually about 31% the first year, 25%, and it slides down until all of it's all of it's paid off. So that's one reason why there's this lag and why debt service grows slowly after you were to authorize new bonds. The second reason is that for the first 2 years, the state pays only the interest costs, and if there are no principal payments until the third year, from the third to the 15th year. So there's also a lag there in the costs increasing. And so why do I mention this? If you go to page 18, exhibit number 12, what that shows is the effect. I'm comparing last year's capital program with this year's capital program from the administration. And as you can see, the last two columns are the interesting ones. The second column from the right shows the additional debt service that we anticipate based on the issuance stream. So this is where you're going to be over the next 5 years. The farthest on the right goes out 10 years and says where this, 8, 24, 54, 103, where's that number going to be 10 years from now? The answer is about $376 million. So there is a slow growth in these interest costs, but it does come down much down the line much later. And the final thing that I have for you is on page 19. It's exhibit 13. Each year, Moody's comes out with a report on the liabilities of the 50 states, the long-term liabilities. And recently they've added pension liabilities and OPEB, which is the retiree health. And what this shows is the shaded parts are the state of Maryland and states that have a higher long-term liability based on the criteria that Moody's uses than Maryland. So the point here is that, and I just have the 14 AAA rated states in here. The numbers there is how they say Maryland is 7th in long-term liabilities to revenues of all 50 states, and it is the highest among the AAA rated states. And I think Ohio, since this came out, Ohio, I think also should be on this is on this list now, but they weren't on the list when this report came out last September. And finally, I will say there's the caveats. If you're going to compare states, you better understand what you're comparing. And so there's a few things, these bullets on page 20, I think that are important to put some context behind the data. The first is how Moody's treats lottery revenues and bonds supported by lottery revenues. Moody's considers that to be state debt. And the reason for that is the lottery revenues in Maryland, for example, they flow into the general fund after the calls that they have on the lottery revenues. Also, the reason lottery revenues are used is to provide funding for important state initiatives and priorities, and it offers relief to other state tax revenues. So Moody's position is that it's close enough to it. It's not technically fits this very strict definition of what a state tax is, but it's so close to that, and it provides the same service that a state tax would, that it considers all those projects to things like that to be a state debt also. And the two other bullets are basically what's called normalization. When I'm normalizing is that's kind of comparing making it to apples comparison. One of the things with debt service to revenues is Maryland, as I said earlier, Maryland has a 15-year limit on its debt. It's common to have 30-year debt issued. Now, if you look at the ratio, that means we're paying much higher debt service. And that's not a bad thing if you're retiring your debt more quickly. And so Moody's does not want to punish a state like Maryland for amortizing its debt more quickly and paying it down more quickly. And so what it does is it recalculates the debt so it's all 20-year debt. So if you're comparing a 30-year state with a 15-year debt state, they make it all 20. And so, and this actually helps Maryland because it makes our debt service ratio look a little better than otherwise would have. And the second has to do with the state retirement and pension system. If you have a liability, there's and even if you don't have a liability there's a rate of return that you're assuming in that, and those vary from program to program, basically. And in Maryland's case, ours is a little bit lower, at least it was the last time I checked, than most of the others are. And so, and this has a similar kind of effect that if you have a lower discount rate, you're being more cautious, but you're also, that makes your liability larger. And so in order to make the apples to apples comparison, they use the same discount rate for all the different pension plans. And so those two things actually benefit Maryland. And so if you look at the middle two columns here, the implied debt service to revenues, implied is that what I just talked about, that normalization, and the pension liability, we're still pretty high, even with the apples to apples comparison that they use. And with that, I will say that the DLS concurs with the governor's allowance, and I will conclude my remarks and take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Frank, for a great presentation and analysis. As always, are there questions for the analyst? Okay, thank you, sir. See you in a minute. State Treasurer's with us, and sir, you have a team or anyone you want to bring up? Bring them on up. Welcome, Mr. Treasurer. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's tempting to get up and just say me too.
Mr. Treasurer, I don't love that you stole Rebecca Ruff. I have to say welcome to Rebecca, our former DLS analyst.
You're doing a great job, by the way.
Welcome.
Well, it sounds like she needs no introduction. But she is, Rebecca Ruff is our Director of Debt Management. To my left is John Martin, who is the Chief Deputy Treasurer. And before I get started, just a special note of thanks to Mr. Patrick Frank for the outstanding job he and DLS did on the analysis of the state debt. You all, hopefully you have a more detailed written testimony from me, so I won't go into that in the interest of the committee's time. I would just quickly go over 2 points that were raised in Mr. Frank's testimony. One is the bond premium. As he indicated, we are working with the administration and DLS to get that issue resolved. Frankly, it hasn't been as robust as it has been in previous years. It's just how it goes sometimes. But we are going to work to get that resolved, and just know that won't be an issue. And secondly, the analysis called for the state treasurer to brief the committee on how the state plans to maintain the highest credit rating and low interest rates as a high debt state that is expanding its bond program. Let me say this. We've had a AAA bond rating from the various rating agencies for quite a long time. Standard & Poor's since 1949. I guess maybe I was just around for that one. You all probably don't remember that one. Moody's since 1970 and Fitch since 1993. And we've been able to maintain that bond rating in all sorts of turbulent economic times, pandemics, the whole bit. And we were able to do it with things, again, as were mentioned, like having that 15-year maturity rate as opposed to 30 that many states use. They like some of the things that we have in place, like the Capital Debt Affordability Committee, the Spending Affordability Committee. They like those kinds of things that we use to manage our debt. But it should be noted that recently Moody's downgraded the federal government from a stable outlook to a negative outlook. And following this action, the agency undertook a review of Maryland's rating due to its dependency on federal jobs and gross domestic product. So it was actually funny. I think in December, I was all ready to brief the speaker and the Senate president on this, and on the day that I was scheduled to brief them, we got note that literally an hour before I was supposed to brief them, that Moody's had reaffirmed our AAA bond rating in spite of the concerns that they had with the federal government and Maryland's reliance on the federal government. But we've gotten enough warning signals, quite frankly, that we are taking it very seriously. They seem to be switching from more qualitative things, like I mentioned earlier with CDAC, and more quantitative things, like our outputs and things of that nature. Ahead of our bond sale for this year is scheduled for June 5th. In early May, hopefully the first week of May, for the first time in over a decade, we are planning to host all three analysts in Maryland just to go over, introduce them to our economy, go over some things, answer any questions. All of that. So we're hoping to further, when we have some new analysts who are less familiar to us and we to them. So we're working on establishing that relationship, and again, letting them see firsthand, we're going to take them to the port, and, the other details are going to still be worked out, but we're working closely with the administration to get that done. But it would be remiss of me not to say that maintaining our AAA bond rating, quite frankly, goes far beyond the state treasurer's office. It's, it's you guys. It's the administration, the policies that that you all pass and act and things. I'm confident that we will maintain that. I know how closely this body in particular has been socially responsible and fiscally prudent. So I know you will continue to do those things. And if anything comes up, obviously we will alert you as quickly as possible to what we're hearing, and ultimately what you all decide to do. We will carry it out, from our end, and we'll hold on to that AAA bond rating, or we'll do everything that we can to make sure that happens. So with that, sir, like I said, we have a more detailed testimony if you all wanted to read that, and we're here to answer any questions.
Any questions for our treasurer or treasurer's team? Delegate Rice?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has Moody's commented at all about our looming multi-billion-dollar structural deficit?
I'll let you have that one, John.
Actually, I'll let Rebecca talk a little bit more about it.
Sure. We have regular interactions with them. I think that all three of the rating agencies are keeping an eye on the discussions and, monitoring how the state intends to approach that. It's certainly not something that has gone unnoticed. But we're keeping them informed as to any time that additional information is put out with regard to the revenues or the actions of this body and the administration's proposed budget. So it'll be a talking point when they come in May, but by then you'll all have addressed the problem.
Right. Oh. Very good. Any other questions? Treasurer, proud of you, doing a great job. Thanks for being with us, and good to see you again, Rebecca. John, thank you all. You too. Thank you. All right, that concludes public debt. We'll move back to Patrick Frank for our Maryland Thoroughbred Race Operating Authority.
This is a new agency. It was created last session. It's the Maryland Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority. I'm just going to call it the authority. When it was created, there were, I think, 4 things that were important for it to do. It was created because there was some 2020 legislation that provided funding to renovate Pimlico and Laurel horse racing tracks. And those projects had not hardly moved forward at all. So there was concern last year about the progress that was made, and this authority was created to address that. And in doing so, it was asked to do 4 things, probably a little bit more than that, but 4 things I think important. First is the feasibility of the 2 race tracks. Secondly, what are best practices for operating a racetrack? Thirdly, what progress has been made in the last year, and the 4th one is they may, if they want to, employ an independent firm to operate horse racing in Maryland. It's a steady budget from year to year that this has. There was no spending in 2023, obviously, and so then you can see it's almost no change in the budget from 24 to 25. Page 2, Exhibit 1 shows the pie chart of what the spending is for this agency. Not surprisingly, about 20% is salaries and wages, and 3/4 of it is contracts. This is an agency that is going to be using a lot of contract work, and if there were an operator there, that would be another contract. So page 3, Exhibit 2 shows the change from year to year. Some very small changes there on the budget. I'm going to move to page 4. That's where the personnel data is. There are 6 positions are authorized for this agency. The first one came on board last August. That's the executive director. For all of last year, there was only 1 position. The agency, the authority, I should say, has told me that they're going to hire people on as they are needed, and as their work force, as their work increases, and that one of the reasons they haven't hired more people sooner is the workload from their estimation hasn't been there. They anticipate hiring an executive associate any day now, and a fiscal administrator later this winter. Okay, on page 5, the first of the key observations, basically that's a kind of an update on why this authority was created. Most of what I've already given you. The $375 million was the cap on what could be spent for Pimlico and Laurel. That was $155 million for Laurel Park, $180 million for Pimlico, and $40 million was unassigned and could have been used for either of the two. The bullets on page 5 and onto page 6 is more detail about what this authority can do. I'm not going to go into that in the interest of time. There is a paragraph, second paragraph on page 6 that's kind of, I think, is important. Basically, the way this agency is funded, the legislation from 2020 started giving them $17 million a year in revenues for the Racing and Community Development Financing Fund. And so that since 22 has been getting $17 million a year. Since the project hasn't moved forward and bonds have not been issued, those funds are available. They can be used for this agency, and that's where the funds come from for this agency. So really, if you think about it, this report or this analysis is the first of an annual update on what's happening with that $17 million that's being appropriated every year. The second key observation is the work that the agency did in the 4 months leading up to the beginning of this calendar year. They put together a report that answered the questions that they were asked to answer. And they also hired 2 consultants, Populous to review the tracks and Crossroads to examine operations. And from that, the authority does not believe that having two tracks in race in Maryland is feasible. They are recommending what they call Pimlico Plus to consolidate racing in Pimlico. The cost estimate are about $400 million for the work that would be done to Pimlico. The second part of this is operations, and the recommendation here is that a nonprofit be created, and that this nonprofit operate the racetracks, and would have to answer to this authority. The horsemen, the breeders, and also the family that or the company, I should say, that owns the racetracks, they have all expressed concerns that the for-profit model may not be the best model. And then that's one of the reasons why it's recommended that a nonprofit be created. DLS notes that if there's $155 million for Laurel Park, there's going to have to be legislation if you want Pimlico Plus, if nothing else, just to make it clear that money can be used for Laurel Park. The authority should be prepared to discuss its plans and answer any questions that the committee has. On pages 8, 9, and 10, I outlined some issues that I think moving forward should be discussed and examined, and which can understood and can have answers to. These is not meant to be an exhaustive list of everything going on in horse racing. Horse racing is a very broad and complicated industry, but I do have a few things that should be looked at. First is about the capital spending. It's really difficult to estimate that. We've seen various estimates already in recent years, and really until the scope is more clearly defined, there's design work done and things like that, we probably won't have a very then we'll have a much better idea of what all this will cost. The second thing is that part of the Pimlico Plus is the state will need to buy property or get property for Pimlico for additional training facilities, because the Pimlico just isn't large enough. The Populous, they took a look at numerous pieces of land, properties, and 8 were scored and 3 were deemed most appropriate for this. And so we're saying on, I guess the second bullet is they should use it. The authority has its own procurement authority. And so that's probably appropriate since it's very different than a normal state agency. But because of that, we still expect them to adhere to the highest standards and get the best value they can with things like the training facility, and also some funds were authorized for some housing for the employees that work there. We expect that money be spent well. Page 9 has exhibit number 3, and that shows attendance at Pimlico and Laura Park over the past decade. This is we're building a facility for people to come. This is what's been happening in the facilities that we have now. There is clearly a decline. Part of the reason probably is the old facilities, and just having a newer facility would probably attract more people too. Also, in its reports, the authority has some ideas about how to reverse the decline and how to effectively market and the new racetracks. Page 10, on exhibit number 4, this is a map that shows the average drive times to Pimlico. Of the A in Baltimore is where Pimlico is located. The red line is a 30-mile drive to Pimlico on average, and the black line is an hour's drive to Pimlico. I also got some census data. And about 1.4 million people, a little over that, live within that 30-minute drive, and about 4.4 million people live within an hour's drive of Pimlico. I raise this because Preakness it happens at Pimlico every year, and it's a major event, and people come from all over. The idea here is it's going to be not just Preakness, but there's going to be another 130, it's going to be 140, 160 racing days they're talking about. That's a lot of racing days where you're going to have to rely on the people that live nearby. And so this is kind of a sense of what that might look like. Another factor is horse racing is part of gaming. Gaming has been expanded. That may be affecting horse racing as well. And those are things to be thought about. And finally, under this model, the state owns the track. The state would find somebody to run the track and stuff like that. And so really, in the end, this is the state could, if this is not done well, there are concerns that there could be an operating deficit or something like that. Nobody wants to see an operating deficit here, and I'm not suggesting that it's going to happen. But one thing we should be cognizant of, if the state owns it, it owns it. And so we need to be very careful of how we manage this. And those are points on that. My recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks and take questions.
All right, Mr. Trang, thanks once again. Thank you for the analysis. Any questions for our analyst? Okay, sir. Thank you again. Let's bring up Mark Brody and anyone else. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Barnes and members of the committee. I appreciate your time today. My name is Mark Brody. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority, MTROA for short. We do not have an acronym yet. A little nickname, maybe Mount Roa. Joining me today is our Chair, Greg Cross, and Assistant Attorney General, Eric London. The MTROA has reviewed the analysis and recommendations from the Department of Legislative Services in preparation for this budget hearing. We thank Patrick Frank for his guidance and careful analysis. As a new agency, this was our first time, obviously. In addition to my brief remarks, we have also provided the committee's additional information that complements the analysis. MTROA is among the newest public entities in the state of Maryland, established in 2023 to return the state of Maryland to a best-in-class location for thoroughbred racing. The authority is composed of appointees for the governor, legislative leaders, and representatives of the horse industry organizations, the Maryland Stadium Authority, the Maryland Economic Development Corporation, and areas surrounding Pimlico, Laurel Park, and the Bowie Race Course Training Center. The authority convened for the first time in August 2023, and it's met regularly as it has worked toward recommendations that it views to be in the best interest of Maryland racing and the state's citizens. These recommendations are informed by detailed comparative economic analysis of Maryland horse racing and its competitors, along with exhaustive vetting by the leading racetrack architectural firm in the world. As required by the General Assembly, MTROA released its first report in January 2024, which is a legislative requirement. It came on January 5th, providing an update on the progress of Pimlico and Laurel Park redevelopment plans, the feasibility of new and replacement thoroughbred training facilities in Maryland, and a meticulous review of best practices for thoroughbred racing industry operating models. MTROA is recommending a new plan that centers the state's racing industry at its historic home in northern Baltimore. That's the Pimlico Plus plan that Patrick was just referring to. Under the authority's proposal, which is not yet before the legislature, the Pimlico property would be completely redeveloped and would include parcels that will allow for a new hotel and garage. A new right-sized clubhouse facility would be reconfigurable and could flex up for larger events. The Pimlico track would be reoriented and constructed to allow horses to race on a synthetic surface for maximum horse safety. Housing for track workers would be constructed in the community, providing a catalyst to ongoing development in the Park Heights area, which of course the neighboring residents are very excited about. Pimlico would stable about 650 horses, and approximately 140 to 160 racing days per year would take place there. As part of this plan, a new horse training facility would be constructed in Maryland at one of the several recommended locations with stables for 700 horses. The authority has also proposed that day-to-day operations of Maryland racing be transitioned to a new not-for-profit organization that would manage between 140 to 160 racing days per year. Maryland's racing operations would follow a successful and sustainable model similar to the one used in New York, which established the New York Racing Association. Whereas prior plans have come in millions over budget, this plan recommended here is at or below aggregate allocations authorized and enacting legislation. The plan being proposed vests long-term control of thoroughbred racing with the Maryland thoroughbred industry and is modeled after the highly successful operational structure employed by the state of New York that I just referenced. It has widespread industry support, and for the reasons discussed in our report and the studies that accompany it, offers what we believe is the best approach to return Maryland's thoroughbred industry to national prominence. Our mission is to serve the interests of the state, its residents, and thoroughbred racing industry to create a sustainable and thriving model in Maryland that present and future generations can enjoy for decades to come. Thank you, and we'll be delighted to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, and thanks to you both for your great work and service this summer and through the interim and getting this plan together. Are there questions? Delegate Edelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your work and your presentation. I'm curious if you could comment on the discussion in the analyst report about the expanded options for gambling in the state of Maryland and how that might affect, you know, the need or the interest in gambling on horses going forward, and if there's any comparative analysis that you might have from other states as to how it's impacted their market.
We do. As part of the report, we commissioned a nationwide economic study that studied handle growth, purse stability, race states, compared us to all the leading horse races and horse racing venues in the country. Handle in Maryland's actually up 22% over the last 10 years against that gambling backdrop, so there's more interest. The conclusions of the economists were that we were well positioned to put forward a strong product. And also, it also recommended things that we adopted, you know, working with our neighboring states so we're not competing with them, so that we, for example, have Delaware running and Virginia running and Maryland running on different dates so that we maximize attendance. I should note that the attendance numbers that are in the analyst report those came from the economic study, but they're not right. They stopped tracking attendance at the Maryland tracks in 2016. All that's tracking is programs sold, and now everybody bets on their phone, so they put the program on their phone. So what it really is a reflection of paper to electronic. It has no relationship to attendance at all.
You mentioned that the plan was not yet in front of the legislature. When do you expect that this session next, or what's?
I expect it this session, and my commitment to leadership is to finalize an agreement with the Stronach Group by March 1.
Okay, we'll look forward to that.
Wish me luck. I'm glad February's a leap year.
Right. Get that extra day.
That's right.
You also mentioned that the aggregate expense would be about what we had already sort of appropriated. That's the bonding authority we gave you, but you're also going to use the 50 million in debt service that's accumulated. Is that right?
The RIFRA funds, yes. So the RIFRA funds plus the 375 We don't have architectural drawings, but we've got detailed design drawings. And what we proceeded on Populous, which was the architect we hired. They've done most of the racetracks in the world, actually, in combination with the Stadium Authority. They both looked at it, that the numbers it came within $1 million, the estimates that we currently have of the money that we have allocated and the money that we're going to need.
Right. The analyst also mentioned some concern about operating at a loss, which I know the current operator, I think, is operating at a pretty significant loss. Can you talk a little bit about what you did this interim to sort of abrogate that or account for that?
Yeah, I want to be clear, we're not going to propose that the state subsidize $1 of operational loss. That's just not where we're going. What we're going to do is create a not-for-profit that has to operate like a business. If they lose money, they're going to have to adjust race dates and purses to make up for that loss. So there's currently and we will come forward with a pro forma with this recommendation, which shows that we'll be balanced. And then if we profit from things like the Preakness, which we will be licensing and running, or we profit from the model, then they'll have that money as a reserve and can plow it back in. We may need to set aside some money just to start up capital because of the way the cash flows work, but there won't be any state subsidy for operations. Okay. And I said when we introduced this is a bet on ourselves model. It's for the first time the horsemen and the industry controlling itself rather than butting heads with a for-profit operator, which we have seen in Maryland for 50 years.
Yeah. And then just finally, to be clear, so the new plan would have most of the investment headed up into Pimlico. I know the former plan had money going to Laurel. That would no longer be part of the equation. Is that right?
That's right. The current owner will be free to sell or develop Laurel. There'll be money invested at Pimlico, and then there's approximately $110 million that will be invested in a training site, and we have 3 locations that are recommended. We've scored them, so we have a pecking order of the ones that we prefer.
Good. We'll look forward to seeing the proposal when it comes in, hopefully after March 1st, I guess. Any other questions? I'm sorry, Delegate Ruff. Good to go. Okay, excellent. Sorry to steal your question, Delegate. Well, thank you both again for your hard work. I know you've done a lot of work, and we look forward to the proposal. So
Thank you. Wish us luck.
Thanks so much.
Take care. All right. We'll move forward with Department of Service and Civic Innovation. We have Madeline Miller as our analyst. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Madeline Miller, and today I will be presenting the DLS analysis of the Department of Service and Civic Innovation. This department was established via executive order just over 1 year ago. That order was then repealed and reestablished by Chapter 99 of 2023. DSCI was only able to spend about $339,000 before the start of the current fiscal year, which is also when the Governor's Office on Service and Volunteerism and Volunteer Maryland programs moved to DSCI. The working appropriation includes approximately $24.2 million across fund types. Chapter 99 allows DSCI to retain unspent general funds in 2 special fund accounts associated with the service year pathway programs for fiscal 24 through 26. Of the current $24.2 million, DSCI reports that approximately $5.4 million will be carried over to fiscal 2025. The existence of these non-lapsing special funds means that the budget grows by $31.8 million in the allowance. However, $19.2 million in special funds represents a double count. A similar chart, Exhibit 1 on page 2, shows the true increase of about $12.6 million in total spending power between fiscal 25 and 24 and 25. During fiscal 24, DSCI launched the pilot year of the Maryland Core Program. This program has 2 pathways, the Young Adult Service Year Option Pathway and the Maryland Service Year Pathway. Maryland Core participants are placed with partner organizations and receive at least $15 per hour for their service. Upon completion of the program, participants receive a $6,000 completion award. The award may be issued as a taxable cash payment or to a Maryland 529 account. The first cohort includes 274 participants as of December 1st, 2023. An overview of DSCI's fiscal 25 allowance is shown in Exhibit 2 on page 4. Most of the funding, including the double counted special fund authorization, supports the 2 pathway service year programs. General fund support to one of the pathway special fund accounts is also mandated by Chapter 37 of 2022 and Chapter 99. In fiscal 2025, the mandate level is set to 10 million. Federal fund grants through GOSV support participants of the AmeriCorps program. Personnel makes up about 8.2% of department expenditure. The proposed budget change is shown in Exhibit 3 on pages 5 and 6. General fund and special fund expenditure increases are driven by the department's service year programs. Compared with fiscal 24, DSCI reports it plans to more than double the number of participants. And then funding also increases for personnel as 7 positions are added. 2 are transferred from the boards, commissions, and offices unit of the executive department, and 1 position is transferred back to BCO. Additional information describing the cost increases related to the service year pathway programs begins on page 6. And as I just referenced, the special fund for the Maryland service year receives a general fund mandate. The special fund for the young adult pathway, however, does not. Chapter 37 established a $5 million general fund mandate to the special fund account in fiscal 24. The mandate increases by $5 million each year to $20 million in fiscal 2027 and then continues at that level. In fiscal 24, language attached to the supplemental budget number 2 reduced the amount of general funds provided from $5 million to $3 million. So reaching that $10 million mandate level represents the $7 million change seen in the right-hand column. The fiscal 25 allowance includes $10 million in expenditure from the MSY Option Pathway Fund and $9.2 million from the Young Adult Service Year Option Pathway Fund. Funds retained from fiscal 24, approximately $5.4 million, are not yet reflected in the fiscal 25 allowance. Of those $5.4 million of carryover funds, DSAI reports that approximately $1.6 million are needed and will be used for the awards to pilot year participants. Due to their pilot year beginning in late October, they will not be able to receive the $6,000 awards until the next fiscal year is started. Therefore, $23 million would be available for the second cohort stipends and awards, recruitment for the program's 3rd year, and other program costs in fiscal 24 and 25. Additional funds may also be available to the extent that the funds receive donations or that partner organizations contribute to stipend costs. DLS calculates that not all of this $23 million would be necessary for MSY Pathway and YA Pathway stipends and completion awards in fiscal 25. If program participation were to double to approximately 550 participants, DLS calculates that DSCI may only require $16.5 million to make all stipends and awards. Accounting for the anticipated retained but not yet appropriated funds, those carryover funds, DLS recommends that the general fund appropriation for the MSY and YA special fund accounts be reduced by $5.5 million, with $2.2 million and $3.3 million coming from the MSY pathway and the YA pathway respectively, based on the number of participants in the pilot year of the program. One increase also shown in the proposed budget change chart was reported by DSCI to be a technical error, and in absence of an alternative justification for this expenditure, DLS recommends that the general fund appropriation be reduced by approximately $413,000. I do believe that DSCI includes a justification in their testimony that was submitted. Changes to the department's personnel complement are described on page 8. Funding for 7 new positions being added to the department does not reflect the standard 25% turnover rate that is typically applied to account for the time to hire new staff. DLS recommends increasing turnover for 7 positions to 25% accordingly. The key observations begin on page 9. DSCI launched the Maryland Core Program on October 25th, and a comparison of the 2 pathways as established under Chapter 99 are provided in Exhibit 4. DSCI published its first annual report on the Serving Every Region Through Vocation Education Act on December 1st. The key performance indicators identified in the annual report are reproduced in Exhibit 5. One of the numbers there cited is the $7 million in amount of stipends awarded under the program. Additional support of the Maryland Core Program in fiscal 24 came from partner entities who contributed approximately $621,000 towards stipend costs in fiscal 24. Funding requirements of DSEI may change in future years based on what partner entities choose to contribute. And the partner entities are responsible for covering the cost of fringe benefits for program participants, which are not reflected in Exhibit 5. That's estimated to be approximately $2.1 million for the first cohort. And then DSEI was responsible for the cost of completion awards, which I previously mentioned was $1.6 million. A typo appears at the top of page 11. I apologize for that. It says 1.4, it should say 1.6. DSEI reports that it intends to open the application window for the second cohort in this month. And the second cohort will begin in September rather than late October. DSEI should comment on the costs of the pathway programs to the state compared to the partner organizations or government agencies. DSEI has additional reporting requirements related to the Maryland Core Program that will be useful for understanding the cost and benefits of the pathways in future years. Beginning with fiscal 24, DSEI must prepare annual reports for each of the 2 special funds, and an independent program evaluation must also be reported by July 1st, 2028. The allowance does include funding to begin pursuing that contract. DSEI reports it is in the process of developing the request for proposals for this evaluation. The second observation begins on page 11 and Exhibit 6 is on page 12. Exhibit 6 shows performance data for the Governor's Office on Service and Volunteerism and Volunteer Maryland components of the department. Volunteer hours compared with fiscal 2019 have compared with federal fiscal 2019, the volunteer hours contributed in federal fiscal 2023 were 72.4% lower than they were pre-pandemic. Other measures, such as the total funds granted to community-based organizations, grew in the same period. That measure increased by approximately $1.3 million. Because AmeriCorps, Volunteer Maryland, and the Maryland Core Pathway programs are aimed at different populations, DSEI will be able to expand the reach of each in each year moving forward. Recommended actions that DLS has are summarized on page 13, and I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Miller, for the great presentation and analysis. Are there any questions for the analyst? Okay, thank you so much. We'll bring our secretary, Paul Montero, up. And any of your team you'd like to bring up, please do. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Nice to see you.
Chairman. Good to see you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair Chang. Thank you, members of the committee, for having us here today to review the budget of the new Department of Service and Civic Innovation. I'd like to acknowledge the diligent efforts of our DLS analyst, Madeline, and her collaboration with us. I'm joined today on my right by our Deputy Secretary, Sarah Fleming, and our Chief Financial Officer, Jessica Wakefield, who joined us a few weeks ago. Service Year Option or Young Adult Pathway Director, Aaron Dolan, is behind me on the left here in the audience, as well as other key members of the DSCI team in the audience. I believe you have DSCI's full response to the DLS analysis, and we ask that you concur with the governor's proposed investment in our nascent program. Our department is focused on translating the governor's rhetoric of creating a state that serves, a state that leaves no one behind, and a state that uses service to create a 21st century workforce into a tangible reality. DSCI is working to implement the SERVAC that the General Assembly passed less than a year ago. We're grateful for the state's investment in creating a first in the nation program over the past 8 months. In both programs, the experience is a mix of personal and professional development. Participants have access to a range of wraparound supports to address challenges like transportation, food, and housing support so that they can successfully participate in the program. I previously served as the director of AmeriCorps Vista, the domestic version of the Peace Corps. And I can tell you one of the most exciting design features of what is in the SERVAC are those wraparound supports. If I had to make a list of the reasons why people quit my program at AmeriCorps Vista or never applied in the first place, it's that list of wraparound supports. To be clear, our pilot cohort includes a significant number of members from the lower rungs of the socioeconomic ladder. And these wraparounds make it possible for them to be a part of this program. A significant number of our members reported being underemployed or unemployed but for their participation in this program. And to be clear, this was the design. The amount at issue that's seen as maybe an overage is very much built into allowing us to retain funds to provide wraparound supports for our members year to year, a special authority that goes away in 2026. And that the wraparounds make the difference between retention or attrition. The goal is that participants emerge from our program with a clear plan on what comes next, whether that's going to school, enrolling in an apprenticeship program, enlisting in the military, or finding a job with upward mobility. Our inaugural class, as Ms. Miller mentioned, launched at the end of October with about 270 plus members. They're placed at more than 100 host employer sites around the state. They're serving full time with at least 30 hours a week of service and approximately 10 hours a week of professional development. As they complete the year, they earn a $6,000 completion award that can be used toward tuition, apprenticeship, or as a cash stipend to start their life in terms of getting an apartment, finding a used car to start their work life. We're approaching day 72 of their service. We're very much at the beginning of this, but something important is happening here. The program that the General Assembly designed in the SERV Act allowed us to recruit in short order diverse participants from 18 of the 24 jurisdictions across the state. They're having positive experiences, gaining traction in work and life. The employers are generally delighted with the level of talent they're getting at their host sites. And we're learning a great deal in the pilot year. And I'm pleased to report that the state of Utah is introducing legislation to replicate this model this year in Utah because they have similar workforce needs. So I'll just end by saying Maryland is stronger for having a program that moves hundreds of our neighbors off the sidelines and back in the game. With your continued investment, we're on track to build a cohort of 600 members that will start serving in September of this year. Finding where individual interests align with state needs will give our members a sense of purpose, help the state build and retain that 21st century workforce, and create productive service-oriented individuals who will reinforce that Maryland is a state that leaves no one behind. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your presentation. Delegate Ivey.
Chairman, and thank you so much, Mr. Secretary, for all the work that you've done to the individuals with you. I think it's just a wonderful program that is here in front of us. Question, and we've talked about this before, our volunteer fire departments and our professional fire departments as well, they're all understaffed, undermanned, and trying to find a pipeline for these young individuals to be able to do this very important work here in our state of Maryland. Could you just speak to opportunities for, speak to if there will be more opportunities for growth, like volunteer fire departments, so on and so forth?
Absolutely. We very much are designed to be a part of the solution in meeting acute workforce needs, and public safety is top of the list. I remember well your community meeting in Mount Rainier and the conversation we had with the volunteer fire department there. We're actively looking at how do we build a pipeline into these fields, fire, law enforcement, dispatch, the 911 centers. So we're actively looking at least one specific proposal to implement in the fall of this year with respect to firefighters. Thank you, sir.
Delegate Wallach.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel. As you know, I'm a big champion of the program and intimately familiar with it. My question is specifically about pipelines into different sectors. So nonprofits versus private sector versus the public sector have different ways of onboarding individuals and different mechanisms that might be helpful for them to onboard. So is there some thought about what might help the participants to make inroads and be hired into the public sector, whether it's state or local government or higher education institutions, because of the hiring specificity that they struggle with?
Absolutely, and thank you for being a host site employer at the University of Maryland. So yes, we're very much laser focused on conversion. They'll have a great service term with us, Lord willing. What happens next? What happens after the service term? How are they converting into apprenticeship, job, higher education? So we do regular professional development, as you know, enrichment programs with our members to very much have them focus on what's coming next and how do they get whatever prerequisites are needed for them to successfully convert. And because we're in a pilot year, we're learning a ton as we go about the unique permutations of various sectors, the HR roles, the novel questions that come up, especially as we move people into for-profit entities. So we're banking all of that learning to, as we double, build clear pipelines into areas that the SERVAC calls out. Certainly the state workforce staffing shortages. We're working closely with MACO to look at shortages at the county and municipal level, and be faithful to the call outs in the SERVAC, the public health, public education, climate related programming, historic preservation, and the specifically named fields in the legislation. Is that what you were asking, or?
Yes, and
Okay.
also specifically, and we can take this offline as well, because I think the specificity of getting hired into local government or state government or even a higher education institution, there's so many HR rules that govern that.
Yes.
That actually taking advantage of this program is a real challenge, because just you don't have the flexibility to just hire as a nonprofit or a private sector does. So it's a whole other ball game for the public sector to really take advantage of this program, which would be really fantastic for the public sector to be able to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Secretary, congratulations on your first cohort and success. I think you guys are doing a great job over there. So
Thank you so much,
thank
Mr.
you so
Chairman.
much. I don't see any other questions, so thank you so
Okay.
much for being with
Could
us.
I let my deputy secretary have the last word?
Sure, absolutely.
Great. Thank you again for the opportunity to share more about our work today. In closing, I wanted to share a few brief reflections with you. So a mere 11 months ago, I was in a different role leading a nonprofit organization. In that role, I was here in this building testifying in support of the SERVAC to create this department. 9 months ago, Secretary Montero was appointed and started to build the team and the new agency. 6 months ago, most of the Department of Service and Civic Innovation team, some of whom are in this room, started in our roles. 3 months ago, we launched the first cohort of more than 270 members that are serving across the state in impactful roles. We're learning from their experiences each and every day as we continue to build the program in a unique way that breaks down barriers for people to serve and uses service as a pathway to education and workforce opportunities. We're excited to share with you that as of Tuesday, the application for the second cohort of this program is live on our website at serve.maryland.gov. We need your help in spreading the word to each area of the state about this opportunity, just as you helped us to share the good news about members serving in your districts at the end of 2023. You can see we're moving quickly, building something special, and being responsive to the needs of our members and employer partners. Thank you for your ongoing support and leadership to make Maryland a leader in harnessing the power of service. We appreciate your time and commitment to this important work.
Your service.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I don't see any questions. Thank you. Thank you all for being with us. Have a great day. I will conclude with Department of Planning. Carrie Cook is our analyst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Carrie Cook to present the analysis for the Maryland Department of Planning. Beginning on page 1, the fiscal 2025 budget decreases 2.1 million or 6.9% to 28.8 million. Page 2 provides an update on the legislative additions to the budget that were enacted last year. So there was 2.4 million total added to the Department of Planning's budget. These were all pass-through grants for the department to funnel towards other nonprofit organizations or projects. 2 of those have been fully executed and transferred, and 1 is still in progress. Exhibit 1 on page 3 summarizes the proposed deficiencies for fiscal 2024 that are included this budget cycle. There's a total of 1.2 million in these deficiencies, and they cover items like higher than budgeted personnel costs due to hiring folks above that base rate, and some additional federal funding that was not known at the time of last year's budget development. Exhibit 2 on page 5 shows the overview of planned agency spending in fiscal 2025. And the previous page, page 4, has a description of everything that the Department of Planning does. So that large slice at the bottom, 27 percent is mostly the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum in Calvert County also has a lot of operating expenses and includes the Maryland Archaeology Conservation Lab. There's also a lot of support to local governments in terms of technical support, things with smart growth and the census, historic properties, and lots of other efforts that the department undergoes. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows the proposed budget change. So there is an overall increase of 1.3 million, and that includes some new positions that were added to the allowance, which I'll get into in just a moment. There's a decrease of 3.2 million for grants. That includes offsetting those one-time legislative ads that I mentioned a moment ago, as well as conclusion of spending on some various federal grants. There is also on the top of page 7, some one-time costs that are associated with the ongoing capital projects at Jefferson Patterson. So these are things like moving the collections and artifacts so that they can go in there and renovate the space, and then they'll have to move them back in. And the other big change here is costs associated with the agency moving out of State Center in Baltimore City. So they're going to discuss that during their testimony as well. There is a note at the bottom of page 7 regarding a grant application for an IIJA program. Unfortunately, that application did not move forward. Moving on to personnel on page 8, the vacancy rate for planning is right around 12%. That is up slightly from last year, was around 11%. The fiscal 2025 allowance adds 9 new positions. 4 of these are truly new positions, and then 5 are contractual conversions. So we like to see agencies converting contractual positions that they want to retain. So they've done these for some positions and things like administration, grants, and procurement. And then the new positions are just going to allow them to continue with their operational responsibilities. There's one that is going to work on some new fiscal requirements, supporting the expanded collections at the Mac Lab at Jefferson Pat, as well as some technical support for digitizing some of their grant applications. At the bottom of page 8, I have asked the agency to discuss filling their vacancies, as well as specifically focusing on 4 positions that have been vacant for over 1 year. Page 9 starts the discussion of the issues. So the first item is sort of tying up the last loose ends in terms of the census. So there were 2 local challenges to census data. So there are mechanisms by which localities, municipalities, or counties can challenge federal census data. So the first was in Rockville, where they were challenging the geographical boundary of the municipality itself. And that challenge was successful. So the Census Bureau made the requested corrections, and it did not impact the population count. The second challenge did impact a population count, and that was regarding the students at the Naval Academy here in Annapolis. So that population count was adjusted. Neither of these are going to affect redistricting or apportionment or anything like that. They're all fairly small changes, but they are just updating that census data for all of their annual work products. And the Department of Planning's role is to help the municipalities and the counties when they file these changes, help them with the process and liaise with them and the Census Bureau. The second item that I discussed in this issue is the urban and rural designations. So one of the things that the Census Bureau does is designate urban and rural areas in each state. And then the Department of Planning breaks that out further into counties and regions. So on page 10, you can see the Maryland population density by county and by region. The last issue that I'm going to discuss begins on page 11, and this is regarding the Maryland 250 Commission. So this commission did exist in the previous administration. They met a few times and had some plans. But in July, Governor Moore signed a new executive order that essentially replaced and rescinded the previous executive order under the previous administration. So they're essentially restarting the process with some new focuses. They're focusing on 3 themes of history, civics, and service, and they have established work groups in that posture. So at the bottom of page 11 and top of page 12, I've just discussed some of the things that they have been working on. They have appointed new leadership and an entirely new commission. The bottom of page 12 discusses the funding for this program. So FY 23 and 24 both included $250,000 in general funds for this effort. And the department notes that they have spent just over 50,000 of those funds to date. They had an annual report that they published in the beginning of January, and the fiscal 2025 budget includes an additional 250,000 in general funds. So just given the very small amount of previous funding that they have spent, most of that is still available in general funds. So for that reason, the Department of Legislative Services recommends deleting the 250,000 that is programmed in fiscal 2025. I do just want to give the caveat that since the commission was reestablished, their report was published, I think, a few weeks after they met. So they didn't have a lot of time to come up with these concrete ideas of how they're going to spend the funding. But just given that they have that fund balance left over and they don't have any concrete agreements or things set up yet, that's why we recommended deleting the additional funds that are programmed for fiscal 2025. So that concludes my formal presentation, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you for the excellent presentation and analysis. Are there any questions of our analyst? Okay, thank you so much. We'll now welcome our secretary. Secretary Flora, I see, is with us, and your team. Feel free to bring up anyone that you have with you.
Great.
Welcome.
Come on up, Ken. Good afternoon. Good to be here with you, Chair Barnes and Vice Chair Chang, members of the committee. Happy to be here. I'd like to introduce our team, and that would include Jeff Kane, who's our Assistant Secretary of Operations, and Elizabeth Hughes, who's our Executive Director of Maryland Historic Trust, and Ron Caulfield, who is our Director of the Jefferson Patterson Park. For the record, Rebecca Flora, Secretary of Planning. What I'd like to do is give you kind of a macro view of what we've been up to, and that will allow you to zero in on the couple of items that were identified by the DLS analysis, which I'm also very grateful for Ms. Cook, and she's done an excellent job in that analysis. We don't agree with the 250, and we'll tell you why, and we'll just dive right into it in essence of time here. So the first thing I think is to really share with you, it's interesting that we followed DSI, who are in the process of building an agency. I felt walking in last year and beginning to really assess the agency that in Maryland Department of Planning, that we had a lot to do around rebuilding. And so we've been very much in that mode, and I'm just going to give you a quick highlight of a couple aspects of that. First and foremost, I do want to emphasize the fact that the Maryland Historic Trust, which represents really about half of our agency, is in absolute solid working order. I'm grateful for Director Hughes, who's been running that program for quite some time. I feel like my biggest job is to really support the work there, to ensure there's accountability as I serve on the board of the Maryland Historic Trust and chair the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. And just want to do a shout out to some of our Heritage Area directors who are here also. I'm really thrilled to be part of that program. Additionally, Jefferson Patterson Park, which really is a subset of Maryland Historic Trust, where all of our archaeological resources are, but also an amazing, really gem down in Calvert County in serving all of Southern Maryland. And Director Caulfield has just done an amazing job. He's only been here a little over a year. He started not that long ago in terms of programming that space and really opening it up to the community. In fact, if you want to join me for a 5K run, I'll be down there tomorrow that they are hosting. So we're really excited about the capital projects that have been going on down there and all of that work. And I feel that in my internal assessment and the work that we did to not only do internal surveying, polling, really doing a deep dive into what do we have and where do we go. That aspect of MDP, I think, was working very, very well. And it really allowed me to turn full attention to other areas of MDP, which include two other key areas. First and foremost, our State Data and Analysis Center. That is the area that we also host. We are the partner with the U.S. Census data, the U.S. Census essentially, and that all operates within the U.S. Maryland Department of Planning. And we only have about 11-person team there. They're doing great. Actually, we need about twice that many to be able to fully optimize our work there as basically demographers that work very, very closely with socioeconomic data. We work on projections, demographers. We also have GIS analysts within that team to really ensure that we are data driven and work with other agencies. We have a partnership with the Department of Aging right now, for example. Some of the smaller agencies don't have access to those types of teams. So our goal is to really, if anything, grow that team over time, to be able to provide more support, more service across the agencies and in the local areas. I really feel it's incredibly important that some of the smaller counties that may not have access to capacity that's needed to really understand and analyze that we ought to be able to help more through tools and through what we can do with that team. So that area, I think we're doing well. We just need to optimize it and really be able to grow it, I think, to even further our work. The other area is really our core planning. You would think that Maryland Department of Planning is all planners. We're not. We only have about 25 planners, actually, and not all of those are true accredited planners. But with that team, we not only provide direct technical assistance across Maryland, we run the Appalachia Regional Commission programming that really comes from the federal area in our Mountain Maryland area. Also work closely with the Eastern Shore area in terms of areas where have less capacity, where we can help them on the ground. And then additionally, we do a lot, of course, with areas of comprehensive planning as required by statute in terms of reviews, education. Our goal there is to really ensure that we help grow best practices in Maryland. And those best practices may vary from rural areas to the outer ring, as I think of it, to our more urban areas. So a lot there. And that's where I want to get to the first issue that was raised in terms of our pins. We have had a couple of open pins. The big aspect of that is that we essentially have been in process of, particularly in that aspect of our work, doing a reorg, essentially reorganizing how we think about particularly that half of the agency that's specific to our planning services and our state data and analysis team. One aspect of that, our GIS analysts, actually we have advertised twice. We are having, as most agencies, difficulty recruiting really quality, experienced people. The areas that we work in are highly technical. We even have PhDs in our team, highly technical people to be able to do the analysis and some of the work that we do across multiple disciplines. We're basically trying to address that in a couple of different ways. One, we're going to be instituting an intern policy and procedure, and at the recommendation of Senator Rosa Pepe, yes, yesterday, basically encouraged us to pursue apprenticeships also. We really feel like we've got to start creating a pipeline that doesn't exist right now in terms of professionals across multiple disciplines and working with universities, colleges, and the high schools, and of course, the DSI program in terms of bringing people into these professions that really run the gamut inside of our agency. So there's that aspect of it. So when we do have some of those technical areas like a GIS analyst, we have a pipeline already in place and starting to move on that. A couple of the other open pins over the last year have been part of our reorganization. I really, quite frankly, did not want to move fast and end up with the wrong people. We really needed to identify where we had gaps in terms of special technical areas. And we have done some moving around of some of the folks inside to ensure we're also focusing on retaining and growing some of the people we have inside of our agency. It's been difficult with some of the classifications of some of the ways positions are classified to give opportunity for growth for some of the people inside of our agency. So we've been really trying to identify ways to grow some of our people, give them new opportunities, and at the same time, ensure that we're strategically hiring the right people. We are now positioned to do that, I feel. We're in the last stages of some of that reorganization, and now we're working with DBM regarding that sort of big macro picture of where we want to go to ensure we can do some of those reclassifications also in terms of some of the promotions and things that we're looking at. Finally, it does relate to our office move. We've been at State Center for over 50 years. We have basically space that is not easy to attract people to, in addition to some of the other challenges that we have. I do believe I've been working very directly with our whole team around our office move. And I do believe that the new office space that we'll move into in May, June of this year, it was intended to be late last year, will be a benefit actually in attracting people and really looking holistically at our agency as a place where people will want to work as part of our overall recruitment effort.
Great.
So
Did you
that's a
also
sense
wanna-
of that.
Okay. And did you want to address the 250,000?
Yep, going to go to that next. So with 250, I'm going to first and foremost make a really strong plea that not be removed from our budget. Maryland 250 is essentially a project that will end at the end of 2027. Obviously, it's in a phase right now where last year we did, after convening several individuals, and these are all new cabinet members, but really looking deeply at the original executive order, which was very narrow in terms of its focus on the Revolutionary War. We basically felt, after convening and examining it, that we would recommend to Governor Moore to reissue the executive order to be more broad in terms of civic engagement and a whole variety of other service. And of course, also reflecting and working around the Revolutionary War and our role in that, but really broadening. And I'll have Director Hughes respond more specifically to that because she's been involved really since the beginning. But with that, a new director was hired. The previous one actually lived in Delaware, and we had to essentially make that decision and recruit and hire a new director, which was done in April of last year. The new executive order was issued just in time for the 4th of July on July 3rd. We worked with the appointments office to formulate an entire new commission that would be reflective of some of our new goals, and they were actually put in place by primarily October, and identifying our new chair, which is former Governor Glenn Denning. With all of that, we were able to hold our first commission meeting in December, and we have already established working groups in the 3 core areas where we have begun to identify programming around things like fellowships, working with our local organizations such as the heritage areas and others in local counties. We really want this to be a program of partnerships. The challenge we would have is if this money was removed, we would have a serious cash flow challenge. We need to really ramp up this year. And by doing that, we have to be able to make commitments to some of these partners and some of the activities that we are basically putting together right now. And we would have a major gap right before our big year, which would be 2026. It is the intention, of course, to have full programming really happening across the state, and of course, a major centerpiece to that. But then the statute does end in 2027 with simply the ability to transition and transfer everything that will have been gained from that towards what can be gained from Maryland's 400th, which won't be far behind that. So we want to make sure there's a good handoff and a really strong program overall. So
Good.
I tried to be succinct.
Yes.
We can answer
And
questions
we have your written
now.
testimony, and it's very thorough as well. So
Thank
thank you
you.
so much. Yes, sir. Thank you for being with us and you're answering the analyst questions. Delegate Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How many employees are working for Department of Planning?
In total, I'm going to defer to our assistant. I think where our numbers are around 140, including contractuals.
144. Okay, and I know you guys are trying very hard to fill the vacant positions. Are you guys still able to provide a high level of service despite having those vacant positions?
We are, and I feel I'm grateful for an incredibly dedicated team that's actually been doing double duty in a lot of areas. And we have, strategically had some contractor help, but there's a lot of people doing double duty right now. So I am absolutely committed to make sure that we now fill these positions.
But like most agencies, if you didn't have the vacancies, you could provide more service. Isn't that right, Madam Secretary?
It's unending, right? But we're going to leverage what we
It's just
have.
it's-
No, I.
Delegate Solomon.
Like I said, I get the short straw sitting next to him. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I just had a quick question and we can follow up afterwards about this too. I know you all have the state clearinghouse for public assistance
Yes.
programs. And I know I've talked to a couple of folks in the governor's office that you all may also be responsible, especially now with the governor's office of grants no longer existing,
Yes.
creating some sort of almost a grants.gov page for the state of Maryland. So we've had a couple of nonprofits in our community where they missed grant applications because there's no central portal. And obviously embracing the governor is making our government work better for Marylanders. It'd be wonderful to have one sort of central clearinghouse that we could get information out, nonprofits could sign up for, we could sort of know and share with our constituents. So we'd love to work with you and maybe DBM on making that a reality.
We'd love to work with you, and actually a lot of that is occurring through the governor's office. So I want to make sure I follow up with you with the
Okay.
specifics on that, because absolutely. And in fact, the federal investment team that's been formed is specifically focused on federal and ensuring that. But let's follow up and give you the details on that.
And if you give it to the committee, we'll. disseminate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Harris.
Appreciate it, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary, for your for being here and your remarks. Quick statement, follow up with a question. We believe it could be really helpful to have school level enrollment projections. I can see this being useful for MSDE, DBM, DLS, IAC, and even local governments and local school systems when making decisions. But I understand that MDP does not use geographical based modeling, and it doesn't produce this type of information. Okay, so can MDP look into what it would take to produce school level enrollment projections?
Yes, the easy answer is yes. But let me follow up with letting you know that actually we just late last year received the last layer of the census data, which actually has a very specific detailed aspects of school enrollment and projections, because it gives us the more granular population projections, which we just received. We actually have to combine that with births and deaths also through Department of Health data. So right now we already, do provide those projections, some of the data, and we do those by statute every 3 years. Some of that data is not totally in our control. So it's a process that we basically do as soon as we get that data. We have done it in the past. We do it every 3 years. In fact, we update it quicker than that if we can. And then I think in terms of the geospatial aspect of it, I would have to learn more about, are there particular mapping or particular breakdowns you'd be interested in? Once again, happy to follow up to see if there's a particular type of data set that you're looking for there.
Appreciate it.
And I guess since we're on that, with regard to your linear model of school enrollment generally, and maybe not accounting for some of the declines with COVID-19, maybe, could you just speak to or get back to us on why the linear model, and might it be prudent to sort of get with DBM and DLS to have a new model to better account for the declines we've seen in COVID? Again,
I don't know that I would look at it entirely as linear. I also serve on the IAC, and so I've been kind of close to some of the school projections that are released every year, actually. And we have factored in items like homeschooling, and a variety of other things that have really transpired as a result of the pandemic. And so those school updates, those projections are actually provided every year. And then we work with the locals we give them to the local areas, and then they do a comparison. And our deviation percentage has been in the 1% to 2%. They're always like pretty spot on, which our team is proud of. And so I'd have to learn more about knowing that process works fairly well right now, from what I understand. I would have to learn more about what your interests are there. Absolutely.
thank you. Great. Well, thanks for spending Friday afternoon with us, and your great work, Secretary.
Thank you.
And your whole team. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you. We do have a few witnesses here for planning. Reminder, witnesses have 2 minutes. And as I read you up, come on up. We'll call you all up. Whoever gets to the desk first, please begin. Lucille Walker, Bridget Carty, and Elizabeth Hughes. Whoever gets there first, you can start. 2 minutes.
Hi, welcome. We're kind of a team, so we'll be quick. I'm very cognizant that it's Friday afternoon. I am Lucille Walker. I am the Executive Director of the Southern Maryland National Heritage Area. We are both a state heritage area and a national heritage area. More on that in a moment. And I'm joined by Bridget Carty, and she's from the Susquehanna Heritage Greenway. And we serve Calvert, Charles, St. Mary's, and Southern Prince George's. And you serve?
Cecil and Harper counties.
And we're both co-chairs of the Maryland Heritage Areas Coalition, which is why we came up together. And we are joined today by a couple of our heritage area directors. If you would just quickly stand and say your names, your heritage area, and which counties you serve.
Sure. Megan Bosco, Prince George's County. Holly Gilpin, part of the Chesapeake, and I'm Dorchester County.
Carol Benson, Chesapeake Crossroads Heritage Area here in Anne Arundel County. Owing stories of the Chesapeake Heritage Area, Talbot, Kent, Queen Anne's, and Caroline counties.
And also Brandon, you stand up. Speaking of interns, Brandon was our intern, is now a full-fledged program specialist. Thank you. Okay. There are 13 heritage areas in the state of Maryland. All of you all have one. It touches every county in Maryland. We are funded through program Open Space and with dedicated funding of $6 million and it comes from the transfer tax, not the general funds. We're very grateful to have program Open Space in Maryland. We're currently steady funded in that program, and we're really appreciative to the Moore Miller administration for that funding. It's important to note, however, that we continually receive more than double requests and granting than we have the ability to fund. This year alone, we have the largest preliminary grant request we've ever had at 260 applicants at over $13 million. The Heritage Area Program has a $7 return on investment for every $1 of state funds, which is exceptional. And given the great need and impact demonstrated by this program and by these grant requests, we will be considering additional funding in the future. And you have all of our impact numbers in our written testimony, and it is Friday afternoon. I won't go into those. Your heritage areas are a powerful mechanism for achieving the goals statewide that is set by Maryland. This is the year of civil rights. We were just talking about the 250th coming up. And of course, the all-important commemoration of the 400th of the founding of Maryland. I mean, I'm just saying it seems like it's far away, 10 years. It's not. And a slight hint, Virginia was way ahead of the game and we can't let them win, okay? So we amplify these goals. We are the boots on the ground. Each of your heritage areas does a lot with a little. And we pride ourselves on those efficiencies, that cost saving, and particularly equity. On a personal level, this state heritage area built on the foundation provided by this Maryland program to become a national heritage area. We were just designated by the United States Congress in December 2022, and President Biden signed us into law January 5th, 2023. We launched in May. This is important because this national heritage area can also support the efforts toward the 400th, because of course, Maryland did begin from the European perspective in Southern Maryland. See, I did it. Is there anything you wanted to ask? We're going together.
Yeah, so that's our time.
See how quick we are? But Bridget, jump in.
Nope.
Okay.
Questions?
Okay.
We'd love to answer them.
Any questions?
Not
You did
one?
so great, you didn't even get any questions.
Oh,
Yeah.
man. Well, thank you all
Thank
for
you
your
what you do.
support.
Thank you all, everyone who was with us.
And thank you, Planning Secretary Flora and everyone who testified before us. Thank you.
Thank you. Keep up the great work. Thank you so much. Committee, that concludes our hearings for the day. We're adjourned.